Welcome to my TED Talk on bad tone decisions. I used to think I needed all of this to get great tone. These are all relationships that I stayed in way too long. Too loud, too unpredictable, emotionally unstable, and somehow I was the problem. But remember, friends don't let friends chase tone based off of childhood memories. So today we're going to build a Helix preset that doesn't try to murder the mix, the sound guy, your bandmates, your in-ears, or any innocent bystanders. Now let's get into it before one of these amps wakes up and asks me to replace their tubes. All right, roll the logo. So now that you've seen the emotional damage that's behind me, let's get into why we're here. For years, just like a million different other guitar players, I chased tones. Not only did I chase tone through amps, through pedals, different rooms, different environments, different guitars. I even dragged a therapist into it. Poor guy had to move away. Some nights, I actually sounded amazing. Other nights, I thought I was playing through a wet sock. I even ended up putting tape on my amps with little Sharpie marks for where my different settings were. And I put tape on my cabinets for mic placement. But it didn't matter. Different room, different tone. Different air, different tone. Somebody sneezed, different tone. So I finally stopped fighting physics and dove into the Helix and built a preset that doesn't change. No matter the room, the stage, the studio, the closet that I hide in, doesn't matter. So we're gonna walk you through the Helix preset that replaced all this chaos. Not just what blocks I used, but why I used what blocks, how I used each block, and help you build a preset that won't change based on the room that's trying to bully you around. So here's the entire snapshot, the entire enchilada challenge. Grab a fork, we're taking this thing down one bite at a time. This is the entire preset from input to output. Every block here has a job. And if it doesn't do that job cleanly, it doesn't get to stay. It's not one of those better to have, not need, the need not have things anymore. We saved that for batteries and for cables. This isn't your pedal board of doom. So we're starting at the input stage where the feel really begins. Noise gate, impedance, pad, all the stuff that decides whether your guitar reacts like butter or like a brick. Then we hit the flavor zone, the distortion. This is where you decide how angry you want your guitar to sound before the amp even gets involved. Next up is going to be the engine room, the amp. The amp is the heart of the tone, but it's not the whole tone. It's the part that should feel like home, no matter where you plug in at. After that, we've got the polish, your reverb, your EQ, your compressor, and your delay and modulation. These are the tools that should make you fit in the mix, not fight it. Then we've got the final touches, the volume controls and the impulse responses. This is where the tone gets shaped for the room, the band, the live stream, your headphones, because you can't plug into an amp. Since you got a newborn, you don't want to wake that baby up. Basically, whatever, whenever, and however you're feeding into it. And yes, I put a looper in here, but I use the looper for practices. So if I'm at home messing around with a new riff or a chord progression that I want to solo over with the band, I do that so I don't need my other bandmates here. And finally, the exit strategy, your outputs. This is how you make sure your tone hits the front of house, the DAW, the live stream, all the same every time. So let's get into it. Start from the beginning. All right, the first bite. This is the input stage. This is where everything starts. And honestly, it's the most important part of this whole thing that most people skip over. But if the feel isn't right here, nothing downstream is going to behave. So here's what I'm doing. I got my input gate on, my threshold's at 45 dB. The decay is at half a second because I don't want to squash out the sound and I want it to breathe and give a little. This part right here, the guitar in impedance, this matters way more than people think. I've got mine set to 230K. That gives me the feel of a real amp input without feeling stiff or way too bright. If you've ever plugged in to another digital amp and felt, man, something just doesn't feel right, it's probably that. Check that setting out. Then the next part is your pad. Now this is the part that's more of a know your gear kind of thing. If you're noticing that you're clipping because you have super hot pickups, then turn it on. I leave mine off. So that's the front door, clean, controlled, and predictable. If that part feels right, then the rest of the preset is way easier to dial in. All right, so the next bite of this enchilada is the flavor zone. This is where we decide how spicy this enchilada is gonna be before the amp even wakes up. Are we going banana pepper or Carolina Reaper? The first pedal is straight boost, and it lives in the dry channel on purpose. This lane is pure guitar tone. No time-based effects, no modulation, nothing washing it out. Just a raw signal getting a clean shove forward. It hits the amp harder without changing the EQ and adds punch and immediacy to your pick attack. It'll keep the left channel honest and sets the baseline feel for the entire preset. This is pure spice. No flavoring, just a touch of heat. Then both the left and right channel get a Minotaur, basically the Line 6 Helix Klon clone. I keep these mirrored so the stereo field stays perfectly balanced. No weird phase shifts, no one side getting more mid-range than the other. The Minotaur tightens the low end without killing it. It adds that signature mid-push that helps keep the amp sing, gives you edge of breakup sweetness, works literally every genre, and helps the amp's response instead of fighting it. Circuit-wise, the Klon style pedal trims low end, lifts the mids, and blends clean signal so articulation stays intact even when driven. This is the flavored spice, the seasoning that makes the amp react like it's supposed to. So when you add the dry lane boost with the dual channel Minotaurs, the amp gets a signal that's tighter, more focused, harmonically richer, and way more predictable across all these different rooms. Turn this whole section off and the amp still sounds good. Turn this whole section back on and suddenly the amp feels wide awake. All right, the next bite of your enchilada, you're getting some meat. We're talking about the dual Cali amps, 2 of them. One in each channel, left and right. I choose the Cali model because it pairs insanely well with the 5150 IRs that I'm using. And it sounds very similar to my 96 5150 combo. So basically the Cali gives me that clarity and punch, and the 5150 IR gives me that aggressive edge. This right here is the dry side, the left channel. So let's talk about the left channel, the dry channel. This lane gets the boost pedal and nothing behind it to dampen the dBs. So this amp naturally hits harder. It's the one throwing elbows without biting any ears off in the mix. It's more immediate, it's more percussive, and it doesn't need nearly as much volume from the amp block to make its point. This is the meat of the sound, the part that gives you punch, articulation, and that, oh yeah, that's the tone moment. This lane, the right lane, is the wet side. This lane is pushing reverb, delay, modulation, all the time-based stuff that adds width and space. You know, the kind of space I wish I had instead of dealing with me all day. And because those effects naturally soften the signal, the amp needs a little more volume behind it. And unlike my first marriage, this lane actually benefits from a little extra volume to help balance out that stereo field. Now, before we go any further, let me explain why we have the reverb directly after the amp block. Because here the reverb just isn't an extra effect, it's part of the amp. In a real tube amp, the spring reverb tank sits after the preamp but before the amp loop. So when you crank the gain, the reverb will react to it. And when you dig in a little bit harder, the reverb will feel it. That's why I place the reverb directly after the amp block. This makes the Helix react like a real amp. The preamp shapes the tone, the reverb adds space, and then the signal hits the loop splits. So let's go ahead and show you how I dialed in the amps, both the left and right. Drive is how hard you're hitting that virtual amp. Too low and the amp is going to feel stiff. Too high, and it's going to turn into a fuzzy mess that eats your articulation alive. I set it in the middle and let the boost and Minotaurs do the heavy lifting. It keeps the amp honest and not overworked. The channel volume is your clean loudness control. It doesn't change the tone. It just changes how loud this amp is compared to everything else. The dry side's gonna be lower, the wet side is gonna be higher. I balance both of them out so the stereo field feels even. Master volume is where the amp breathes. Clean loudness control. Too low and it feels choked. Too high and it gets spiky and uncontrollable. I set it for feel, not volume. Enough to open up the power section, not enough to make the top end scream, "Look at me!" Bass isn't about sounding big. It's about staying out of the kick drum's way. Tight, controlled, never boomy. Mids, the mids are where the guitar actually lives. Forward, present, never scooped. And then treble is clarity. Enough to cut, not enough to hurt. Presence is the amp's attitude knob. Too low and it sounds bored. Too loud and it sounds like it's filing a noise complaint against itself. Sag is the squish factor. Ripple is the vintage hum simulator. Bias is the warmth control. And bias X is the dynamic behavior. Make sure you use these wisely. The second you get cocky, your tone starts freelancing like it's got its own side hustle. Stack all this together, the drive, the channel volume, master volume, EQ, presence, the wet-dry balance, reverb placement, and the deep cut gremlins, and you get an amp section that behaves consistently, feels great under your fingers, and actually listens to you for once. Now here, let's talk about this EQ, because it's not just here for decoration. This is part of the chain where I stop pretending the amp is perfect and start fixing the stuff it refuses to admit it's doing wrong. This is surgical EQ, not a tone shaping tool, not a vibe enhancer, not a this helps maybe, I guess. It's here to clean up the mess that the amp left behind. This is the sub rumble filter. It keeps the low end tight, it keeps the IR clean, and makes sure the bass player doesn't show up in my house with a shovel. This is the mud zone. I'm cutting it with narrow Q so I don't lose body, just the flab. This is how you keep the low end punchy without turning it into a swamp monster. This right here is the cardboard zone. It's where honk lives. Cutting here smooths the mids out, scooping them, so your guitar still speaks but doesn't sound like it's yelling through a paper towel tube. And this right here, this is the pick attack harshness zone. It's not treble, it's the upper mids that get spiky when you dig in. Cutting here keeps the tone smooth, especially when presence is dialed up. Right here, the high cut, this is the fizz filter. It keeps the top end clean, prevents harshness from stacking in stereo, and still leaves enough sparkle to stay alive. This EQ isn't shaping tone, it's correcting bad behavior. It balances the stereo field, feeds the IR, a clean signal, and it makes both the amps sound like they're in the same room. And it keeps the top end from sending you to the doctor with a bad case of tinnitus. So the post-amp EQ lives in the effects loop, because that's where the real tone finally stops lying to me. The amp and the guitar already have a voice I actually like. But the second I start pushing them, they start throwing out harshness and mud and frequencies that feel like a personal attack on my manhood. So I park the EQ right here, after the amp, to clean up the mess like the world's most exhausted janitor. I used to throw EQ in the front of the amp and hope it would magically fix everything. All it did was make the amp angrier. I learned from recording that the EQ is supposed to live in post. Every great album with your favorite guitar tone had the EQ there. Putting EQ in the loop is where I finally realized, oh, this is where the tone actually becomes the tone. For me, this is the moment the preset starts being intentional. Once I started treating post-amp EQ like the cleanup crew after the amp's little temper tantrum, everything got clearer, smoother, and way more mix ready. So this part looks weird, but bear with me. Now that the amps have screamed, punched, sparkled, and generally acted like unsupervised children, it's time to introduce this one block that keeps this whole preset from turning into a group science project gone wrong. This is the 3-band compressor, the glue, the hall monitor, the calm adult in the room. It doesn't change your tone, it just makes sure your tone behaves. And I don't put this compressor before the amp, because that's like trying to calm a child's temper tantrum before they even have it. I wait till the amp is done, whatever it's gonna do, the good, the bad, the ugly, the why are you acting like this, and then I clean up the aftermath. In the loop, the compressor isn't fighting the preamp, it's shaping the finished tone, the real tone, the one that actually hits the IR and the mix, just like it's done in studios. This is where everything gets glued together. So the left and the right amps stop acting like two siblings fighting over the last chicken nugget and it's Saturday at Chick-fil-A. Let me show you how I set up this 3-band compressor. Instead of squishing the whole signal like a regular compressor, this thing splits the tone into 3 zones. Low band, the mud, the thump, the why is my amp breathing heavy zone. The mid band, the honk, the boxiness, the why does my guitar sound like cardboard zone. The high band, the fizz, the ice pick, the why does my tone hate my ears zone. Each band gets its own tiny bouncer who decides how much chaos is allowed. In the low band, this catches the rumbles and boosts the usable punch. It's like telling the low end, hey buddy, inside voice. The mid band, this smooths the honk so chords sound rich instead of nasally. It's the difference between warm mids and cardboard megaphone. This, the high band, this tames the harshness so the top end sparkles instead of stabbing. It's basically a tiny firefighter putting out treble fires. The ratio is at 2-to-1. Gentle, musical. Attack is at 0.1 milliseconds. Catches spikes instantly, and it releases at 134 milliseconds. A smooth recovery. No pumping, and the level brings the glued signal back up. This is the block in the preset that makes your tone sound expensive. It's the difference between my tone is loud and my tone is controlled. Between I built a preset and I built a mix-ready sound. When the compressor lives here in the loop, it glues the whole thing together. It evens out the punch, it smooths out the edges, and it keeps the amps from acting like they're in 2 different bands. For me, the compressor is the calm adult walking the tone child down a hallway, making sure it doesn't lick walls or run into traffic. The amp still gets to be expressive, chaotic, dramatic, like a teenager. That's its job. The compressor just makes sure all that energy ends up sounding musical instead of messy. Once I started treating loop compression like the gentle glue that holds everything together, the whole preset got tighter, smoother, and way more mix ready. I know, by now you're thinking, we spent plenty of time talking about the dry lane, the amps, the EQ, the glue, the cleanup crew. Now let's shift our focus. Let's take this down to the wet lane, the right channel. This part of the tone gives it its width, movement, and emotional space. This isn't just a copy of the dry lane with some reverb slapped on it. This is a whole second amp, a second personality, but to carry the ambiance, the stereo field, and the cinematic feel. Guys like Eddie Van Halen didn't run 1 amp and pretend it was stereo. They ran 2, sometimes 3 amps, each feeding a different side of the PA. 1 amp punched you in the chest, another amp wrapped around your head, and 1 amp filled the room. That's exactly what we're doing here, just without needing a second mortgage for a forklift and a third mortgage for a personal chiropractor. So let's dive into this delay. Set the time at 48 milliseconds, short enough to feel tight, long enough to create width. The feedback is at 11%. Subtle repeats, no clutter. The wow is at 3%, just enough movement to feel analog. The drive's at 0, no grit, no smear. The mix at 39%, present but not overpowering. Dry through is on and the trails are on, so the echo breathes after you're done playing. This delay isn't here to be heard, it's here to be felt. It's the space between notes. It's the breath your tone takes before the next phrase. So now let's talk about chorus. The rate is at 0.3 hertz. Slow, subtle, and smooth. The depth is at 0.3, just enough modulation to feel alive. We're using a rich 4 voices, wide, lush stereo spread. Low cut is at 95 hertz, keeps the low end from wobbling. The high shelf is at 4.5 dBs. The smooth shimmer, no ice picking. And then we have our balanced mix at 50%. So it's equal parts movement and equal parts clarity. So this chorus pedal isn't here to sound like an 80s glam rock effect. It's here to make sure the wet lane feels like it's breathing. So let's get this right. This isn't a mono signal pretending to be stereo with a moving delay in chorus. This is 2 amps, 2 lanes, 2 personalities, each doing their very specific job. Left lane, dry, punchy, and immediate. Right lane, wet, wide, and ambient. Together they create a stereo field that feels alive, not duplicated. To me, the wet lane isn't just an effect lane, it's a mood. It's the part of the preset that wraps around the listener and quietly says, hey, this isn't just tone, this is a moment. This is where the preset stops being a rig and starts being a room. Not the bedroom you've been stuck rehearsing in, thinking, well, it sounds great in here, so it'll probably sound great out there. Spoiler, it won't. All right, enough of that. Let's move on. Before we get into the IRs, we need to talk about the 4 volume pedals. Yes, 4. Yes, 4. No, I'm not trying to summon Steve Vai. Each one has a job. And once you see how they work together, you'll wonder why you haven't tried this. These 2 live in the effects loop because they're not here for swells. They're here for boosts. Clean, predictable, repeatable, plus 4 dB boosts. When I hit these, it pushes the amp just a little bit, just enough to lift the guitar above the mix without changing the tone. No extra compression, no weird EQ shift, just a clean bump that says, okay, it's your turn to talk. These are my lead mode moments. Activate them and the guitar steps forward. It's like you get a second stage, a super lead moment. These 2 live after the loop because they're not boosting anything. They're shaping the wet lane and the dry lane together. When I roll the pedal back to heel, the wet side fades out completely. The delays, the chorus, the ambiance, all of it disappears instantly. But the dry lane still blasts through like nothing happened. That means I can do swells without killing my entire tone. The wet lane fades, the dry lane stays strong. The whole thing feels musical, not dramatic. It's like dialing back your emotions without actually stopping the conversation. Okay, so we're almost there. Now that the tone is built, glued, polished, emotionally stabilized, it's time to talk about the part that actually hits the outside world. The IRs and the output strategy. The IR is the tone stamp. The part that decides what cabinet, mic, and mic position your tone is pretending to come from. I have mine emulating 2 2x12 cabinets. Since each IR is an impulse response of a single speaker with a single mic, I'm telling each lane it has 2 speakers and 2 mics. The left panned hard left and half left, the right panned hard right and half right. I'm using 5150 style IR because it pairs insanely well with the Cali amp and it sounds dramatically close to my 5150 combo that I have. I put the low cut around 80 Hertz to keep the sub rumble out. A high cut around 8 kilohertz to kill the fizz, and everything else in between is the sweet spot. So basically, in summary, this is the part that makes the preset sound like a real amp in a real room instead of a Bill Nye Science experiment on PBS. Gone wrong. This is the exit strategy. How the tone leaves the Helix and hits the front of house. Your in-ears, your DAW, your headphones, your studio monitors, everything that you're hearing through. This is how you make sure your tone hits every destination the same way. Predictable, reliable, and controlled, not at the mercy of the room. And if you notice, I have the right panned hard right, and I have the left panned hard left. And both of them need 0 dB, boost or reduction, because we gain stage this thing appropriately all the way through. So once the IR and the output settings are dialed in, it stops being just a Helix patch and starts being a rig. The one that behaves the same everywhere, no matter who's running sound or how cursed the room is. This is the part that keeps the front of house happy, keeps your in-ears consistent, and keeps you from chasing tone like it owes you money. Oh, God, and don't let me forget the looper, right? Yeah, it's in there. It's in the last block, right before the volume pedals on the left side. But once again, I only use it for practicing. It's like my personal sandbox, where I get to mess around with different playing styles or different solos, different riffs, different chord progressions. And I get to loop them and see what they sound like. So that's the whole thing. The preset, my philosophy, the chaos, the cleanup, the glue, the space, and the control. All of this working together to give you a tone that behaves the same everywhere. I spent years fighting rooms, humidity, amps, sound guys, and my own bad decisions. This preset is the first time I've ever felt like my tone wasn't fighting back. If you want to build your own version of this, steal whatever parts make sense to you. The goal isn't to copy my tone, it's to build something that works for your hands, your guitar, your band, your chaos. And if your tone changes every time somebody sneezes still, well, at least you know why now. All right, well, I'm Thatch, this is the Helix, and this has been my TED Talk on emotional tone stability for guitarists. Roll the logo, I'm getting coffee.